Agile maturity assessment, a vision-centric approach. Mayuresh, over to you.
Okay. So basically, for this particular session, Santosh has set a very good context for me of what CEO as a vision that he's expecting to really drive the agile transformation. What is the success rate? How things are working, and there are different parameters that he talked about in terms of having a successful as a implementation from a that somebody needs to implement agile, help, and see to it that the transformation is a success. This particular session is pretty much aligned to a vision that a CXO person is really looking for it. So basically, a calculation or a success rate of agile transformation is important. There are many models what have been practiced in the market. Before we start, I'll just introduce myself. So my name is Mayuresh Athalekar. I'm a program manager. I'm an agile enthusiast. Worked with 16 plus. From a professional perspective, I hold about 16 plus years with most of the
Hello,
product companies
hello,
like
hello.
PTC, Autodesk, and now working with ADP as a program and release manager. Uh, so from a personal perspective, I'm a photographer, amateur, prefer food and wildlife photography. That's about me. So let's say a particular leader in context to the previous session, some of you might have attended. So typically centric approach or CXO approach is how organizations should be there, or what are the goals that he wants to set for the organization, the practicing professionals in the company, leadership, delivery of the execution, how throughput is happening, how we are meeting the customers' needs, and the strategy. So these are like broader perspectives I have tried to put into a context in order to take as a reference how we are taking or how we are going forward in terms of maturity assessments. So there are different models. Let's say a particular leadership or these the broader categories are into management coaching, leadership consulting, in the organization part of it, how the design should be, what are the policies should be, roles should be, continuous improvement, what are our targets, how we want to go ahead on those perspectives, business and product, how we are innovating as a company to stay ahead of the competition, technology trends, changing market needs, customer needs. And customer centricity is like how fast we are solving the customer problems. In a strategy and the delivery perspective is the process execution and and the collaboration and the dynamics part of it. Now, some of the aspects what we discussed and what we are seeing in actual real world, these are real world visions that have been put in terms of execution of agile transformation. Most of us are going through this process, may align with it, or may feel a heat of it, or experiencing how things are happening in your own organizations. Now, these are just broader level aspects that I'm putting it from a CXO perspective, but just a thought that these could be a vision-centric goals that a CXO may need to analyze how their teams are, behaving, or how the success rate is. Now, there are different assessment models. Trust me, these are personal views. Some of them they use the spider assessment. Some of them use the velocity, and the third one, what you are saying is like a transition phase. Like we are starting, we have defined things, we are performing and norming, storming, these kind of models. Now, all of these models, what you are seeing, is like a data-centric, or the employees who are working on the projects put some data and that gets analyzed. So it's a quantitative assessment, what you see. Like you give a number that I want a success rate of, the velocity should increase by 20% by each product cycle. That kind of thing, assessments are being, discussed at a management level. No offense to anyone out here who is a manager or, into a shoes of a leadership teams out here. But this is a very practical, realistic problem that we see, and based on which people try to meet the needs or meet the numbers through various teams. Like, I'm doing 100 points in this sprint, probably I'll try to do 120. Nobody questions how the 120 came up and things like that. So eventually they try to meet that, then eventually the velocity increases and the graph shows a very nice and beautiful picture that gives a portrait that things are working or may not be working with certain things. But underline, none of these execution themes may or may not be aligned with the vision or company or a group-centric vision that has been put at a leadership level, right? So what I'm trying to propose is a more of a case study or a practiced version that in my organization, in my previous organization, we have come up with in discussion with the executive leadership, and this has been successful in terms of how things can be moved in a certain or assessed in a certain way, rather than it's more of an objective way rather than a quantitative way. So the effort that we are trying to, this is just a proposed effort, and nothing is wrong in Agile in terms of maturity or the way how people are assessing, but this is one approach that I'm putting forward with all of you to really take note of it. So this is a framework which really introspects the team and continuous improvements within the team. The team is responsible for doing the assessment, rather than it's a tool or quantitative measures that are being taken by the teams, right? So they themselves decide the target that they want to achieve going forward, rather than somebody deciding setting goals and giving a perspective to it. It's a guiding tool for the organizations toward improving the areas in line directly to the business goals that have been set by the CXO levels. A tool guide, it's more of a for the coaches or the consultants to give what kind of trainings, what kind of consultation is team needed, at what level. That's a perspective it gives. It's more of an insight and guidance rather than it's a compliance tool, very important. So it's not quantitative measure, it's more of a assessment that a team is going to go through. Okay, so in terms of, let's say, 7 dimensions that I'm taking in line with the business, goals that have been put: strategy, leadership, execution, and product design, the delivery execution. So let's say these are the 7 roles that are being measured and aligned with the business strategy that is being put, or the vision that is being put by the CXO levels. So it could be roles and responsibilities. Now, these 7 dimensions are like guiding measures that I'm putting out here, how things can be assessed. It could be CI/CD that you really want to add it into your bucket, or anything specific in terms of collaboration, or any specific pain points that you and your company might be, or your project is going through, which you feel that it needs to be really assessed on. So you can, these are the 7 parameters that have been put forward. It's just a guiding principle. You can put any of your pain points out here in order to measure. Now it's so basically, a presenter needs to be a facilitator for evaluation. It's a very important thing. Not a person should not be making an opinion or putting an opinion on him or her, her in terms of assessment. So team members should not facilitate, and they need to be fully participating it, rather than being a opinion maker kind of thing. So meeting is around 90 to 120 minutes. Eventually, a team records on certain dimensions that have been put on, and the team keeps track of results as compared to their progress. These are more of action items. So conversation is around dimension is important rather than the statistics. If I'm, want to give a perspective of it. Results are not intended to be compared between two teams. Very important, because no teams or no two team dynamics are exactly the same, which can really be compared. So you cannot compare apple with a mango or orange. So you have to be really assessing on your own. Now, the dimensions of, these are the parameters that we are putting, expert, proficient, operating, neutral, and regressive. So you can name it differently, but these are like very neutral names that somebody is like acting, forming, performing, norming, storming, those kind of things. Instead, these are more normal. The definitions of it is given, like what are the parameters based on which we assess the team's performance, state of action in terms of how things are going on. So as a facilitator, one should have this as a reference slide when a comparison or when an agreement is happening within the teams, right? So you can conduct a session by just a reference date. Now, very important, the way how we start is basically in terms of discussion with the CX or the leadership level on which parameters need to be discussed. You'll have a baseline of each of the parameters, the levels that we see, regressive, normal, those. You start getting a statement into a discussion. Nothing a team member do not fully understand their roles, you can just go on with a incrementing, coinciding statements as you go. Now these are the statements or these are the approaches where a team member need to participate in discussion, get a reference to their what execution is happening, how things have gone so far, and things have been working so far with the team. The team needs to agree on a certain statements as you start progressing. Now there are incremental statements that we are putting in terms of how things are improving or how things are working. Now you can read through the statements, and these statements are coming from the consultants, coaches, leadership team on which they need to be analyzing the parameters of it. Once these parameters or these statements have been agreed upon, you start putting, associate the roles that have been assessed forward, and eventually people will start agreeing to it. Like this particular thing, the level of agreement should come at last once the team agrees or freezes the statement, okay? So once this statement comes, eventually we are assessing or keeping a tag for the team in order to their maturity assessment for a particular team. Now in any of these contexts, at no point of time, we are not measuring quantitative business out here, if you agree. So this is about in terms of how a team is really performed in terms of delivery or their own sprint executions or in certain perspectives. This is from a roles and responsibilities perspective. So all the roles and responsibilities what you see are statements are colliding with the associated dimension, not with what something has happened in the team and all that stuff. So we are not agreeing, disagreeing. There should not be any number perspective definition that needs to be attached out here. Similarly, as we go forward, we give a perspective with what is collaboration, what is the expectation. So the right side context what we are setting is more of a context that we are setting for the team on which parameters need to be measured upon. Then we start with the similar process. Eventually what you see, right now the level of agreement or the level of maturity is regressive, neutral, proficient, and expert is the standard level. People should not assume that the topmost level is the expert level. So anything which comes at top is like what we are behaving or how the teams are performing. What you can do as a facilitator is the shuffle around the statements. So any of these statements, what you are, if you read through or go through, is quite an assessment of their real-time execution, success or failure that has happened in the past. As of now, I have just taken from top, down, bottom to up as a levels. But when the assessment happens, you really have to mix it up so that people will not assume that the topmost level is the expert level. It could be a regressive level also, which they may really be falling into that category. You may never know. And when the brainstorming happens, eventually they agree the statement. This is what they need to really assess upon. So they are not aware that this statement belongs to what kind of rating it is. So it's an it doesn't become an preempt thought process that this statement, echoes with our execution or perception. So it's more of a agreement that they need to come upon, right? And any of these dimensions will be directly reflecting to a business vision that a leadership team is expecting a team to assess upon. In this particular perspective, this need not to be a small scrum team. Ideally, the experience and recommendation is to have a scrum teams, all the scrum teams which are working for a particular product. Let's say if the product is too big or too many scrum teams, distributed, geo-distributed, you can really, if there is a cross-cultural or cross-geo collaboration is happening, you really can limit it to a local assessment. If there is a facility or there is too much dependency, probably you can be in video conferencing or better way of communication through which you can really discuss and brainstorm the success, failure rates, or instances within your team. As you go forward, this is a pretty similar approach that one needs to take, and you can really put dimensions into it. That a leadership, or if you are in leadership format, or in a leadership seats, that you really can assess upon. Eventually what happens is, as you start going forward, we really, this is a story formation I have explicitly because that's the biggest pain point in product development, where the stories are unclear, acceptances are not clear, they are not being written well, they are not customer-centric, they are not aligned to customer needs to that extent. So it's a feedback to all the functions which are operating in a particular environment. May that be a QA, may that be a dev team, a product execution, a build engineer, maybe a build engineering team, or maybe a product owner, product management. All the functions sit together in a team. It's not just about QA, dev that are sitting in a team, but product owner is equally important in order to have a collaborative discussion or a good brainstorming to see the outcome of how things are working for a particular project in terms of agile transformation. Right? So these are the engineering best practices. So I'm not leaving a process apart. There is a touch of process that needs to be formed, although process comes last in terms of if you are self-organizing team, many people really don't care about process, how things are going on. So, how it is being practiced, and things really need to get analyzed, whether there are any, bottlenecks in terms of how processes are being laid, whether they are regressive for the team and that is causing a problem to respective teams for their success and success or failure, how things are going on. So once this is happening, this is quality assurance. Eventually, we are touch basing all the possible parameters, including all the practices that have been done. It could be unit testing, it could be CI/CD, it could be TDDs, it could be, implementation of certain code smell tools like SonarQube, whatever you name it. Automation, how things are running, what is the automation maturity. You can analyze in terms of how things are happening in the individual sprints. Once this is happening, the dimension is basically we are putting 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers. Now, a very important thing is like you can decide the most painful, points that we are having in a team, and you really can track and really target to improvise that particular function because the team agrees that they are the bottlenecks in terms of discussions which are happening right now. Make sense? Right? So eventually what happens is when a team agrees that these are their pain points, it is much simpler and effective for the person or the leadership to take a corrective action in terms of doing trainings or in terms of doing needful changes in the team or adjusting or discussing with the respective stakeholders what are the problems or taking any corrective action. So mentoring, training, support to the team or making meaningful org changes which are aligned to their business visions to make it successful. So once that happens, eventually you know that these are the pain points for this year's or this particular cycle as team is going through, and you can really assess it. Now, many assessments that I have seen in my experience, and nothing wrong with it, they give a tag that this team is performing team, this team is developing team. And that's the baseline that is being taken as the next level of assessment while going through. In this particular thing, that's exactly not, we are not doing that. So when the next level of assessment we do the same level of parameter because the same team might be struggling because of some other factors and they may have issues in terms of execution on different parameters that they see. So essentially now, this year the root cause of pain points could be customer centricity is not in place or collaboration is not in place. This year that improves, but next year you may have some problems in terms of story formation or the roles and responsibilities that have been happening because the dynamics is not improving the next level, next year. So you have these numbers as an assessment tool for the next year, as a context, like as a baseline. So if you are improving in those two parameters, good, you're doing good because you have focused on those parameters and going ahead in terms of improving your pain points or reducing the pain points to a much more performing team, right? But this year you may come up with some other parameters that you really need to focus on. So, any questions? So we have few minutes. Yeah.
You also identify like where the team wants to be and then identify like these are the gaps between where they are, where we want to be, and try and identify some kind of improvement.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. So after this assessment, do you also kind of check where the team would like to be and where they are right now, and if there are any significant gaps in the areas that they have identified as important or have been identified as important, then are there any also like set patterns or suggestions to improve in those specific areas?
So eventually you start analyzing on these parameters, right? Now you agree upon certain that I'm falling into, let's say, neutral or operating. I want to go to a next level. That's my goal that we, as a team, we want to decide in the final roles and responsibilities numbers, right? So in that particular context, what is that needed where the next level in order to achieve the next level? If you go to the next, in this particular sentence, the next level, what you are supposed to be in, that is really listed out there. Let's say I'm operating now, I want to be a proficient. my team needs to be a proficient team, or this particular team needs to behave in, adapt to that particular culture, then what are the things that are being, that they need to do, that is being targeted. Now, having said that, you really can drive the action items or plan in terms of improving those parameters from the trainings, collaboration, whatever is needed on that. I will not put training as like a center point of attraction, may not be needed, but it's more of a collaboration, or even you need some communication workshops or any form of it, which you feel as a team that this will improvise your skills. That will help in terms of going forward. So, as I said, like as a team, let's say a particular product or as a service, if you are delivering certain things, you have couple of teams which are working. Now, the recommendation is the sizable, milestone, major milestone, which is been there for the product delivery, instead of having a very short burst kind of things. So I'll rather from a product perspective or from a service perspective, if you are anything releasing major product, which has in which the team has invested significant amount into it, and they want to see to it that how they are doing in terms of improvising, then that's a that's a scale, or that's a iteration that you can decide for this assessment. You can say, but a release is a very specific thing. Like my release could be 1 month release, but I don't want to really analyze. So if let's say my business goal is for 6 months or 1 year as a vision, then probably my assessment will be according to that. Mm-hmm. No, that's a very, very no-no from my perspective. Because no two team dynamics or no two team environments will have a similar baselines in which they are performing. It could be leadership, it could be your roles and responsibilities that are making an impact. So this team, how they are performing, the recommendation is to really make improvisation in their strengths that they are going forward. No, there is no pass on fail in this case. For example, if you are going with the roles and responsibilities, either they fit in any of these statements. So there is no minimum criteria. So any fantastic performing team and delivering team could be really bad and they fall into regressive levels, where that's the parameter that they really need to take in terms of improvisation in their final goals. Whether they feel that really makes sense to team improvise on those parameters so that they really can make turnaround on those failing parameters, which the team is really agreeing upon. So from my perspective, I have have exercised this particular exercise with 6 teams. That's a size about 45 members, I would say. It could be bigger, but in terms of, let's say, I want to give a particular broader level perspective. Now, payments is one section, or retail banking is one section. That's a very big amount, right? So it will have a very certain channels which you can really meaningfully take a chunk of it and do the assessment for the. So it's a leadership specific decision.
So I understand the, comparing two teams when it comes to, mapping up their assessment levels are not fair to both the teams because the environment can be different. But how about the best practices and what you learn or how you have taken the team from maybe, regressive to operating the journey? Is that being shared or the best practices being shared as a part of this assessment model itself?
So that's nothing wrong, because eventually what you are sharing, how we have turned around certain things which were not working good for us. So the takeaway for the other teams or any of the teams that you see is more of like a bottom line is how things can be implemented rather than how things are getting compared. So definitely, inventing the things again is not a good idea, or it's not recommended in this thing. So if somebody is doing something really good and they have results in hand by changing certain things, then that's recommended. Definitely yes. Sharing is definitely, but comparing is, my recommendation is not, because you are unjustifying the two teams, showing somebody as low and somebody as good, which I don't feel is a motivational thing for the teams. Yeah.
So, is the content of this particular model referable, or is it internal proprietary?
It's not proprietary, so we'll be sharing this. This is a reference, so this is not proprietary. We'll be sharing this as a presentation. But the statements that have been driven is more in terms of having a brainstorming done over a certain period, in terms of assessing the results that a leadership wants to know in terms of action plan for the future, goal settings or vision state.
So begin, guys. I think it's really interesting session, Mayuresh. I never thought of this kind of possibility with assessment metrics. Thanks for that. I think people have good food for thought. So please. May I request Manju, please, for the felicitation?
Thanks a lot, Mayuresh.
Thank you.